So I think basically, whenever you're ready, Christian.
Okay, there's quite a few from yesterday. The first question, sitting for so long seems to bring up unpleasant memories, thoughts, feelings again and again. How does meditation and sitting with these things alleviate suffering? Where does this acceptance come in?
Valerie, do you want to pick that up?
Yes, I mean, this is, thank you for the heartfelt question. And it's what we've been talking about. I spoke of it yesterday and Henry again today. This, one way of naming this practice of sitting in silence, sitting still, uh, with yourself and the whole world is a kind of radical acceptance. And it's true that part of the word radical is probably just because of the, it's no holes barred if we really do it. So things do come up. And Henry has really been guiding us on, ways to be with these emotions and thought loops, memories often, sometimes worries, fears, anxieties, plans, whatever comes up. If it's in the form of a thought loop, then I thought Henry again today, just to catch that. When you notice that, then tune into the body and look for that expression of it. There's something linked to it in the body. It may be a contraction. There's just going to be some sensation. And when that's located, just to allow it some space. I mean, this word allowing, welcoming, it's very different from kind of the discursive analysis that is our habit. I mean, which in other, I mean, you could say that therapy might involve some of that, but the sitting is a different kind of welcoming, exploring, loosening the grip, letting go the sort of entwining vines of story, just being willing to allow that sensation. And I mean, I can remember, well, one session in particular early on where, rather unexpectedly was visited by a very old trauma. And I sort of promised myself as best I could. I wasn't chained to the cushion. But in that moment, it was like all I asked of myself was to stay there, not to run out of the Zendo. Sort of screaming, is what it felt like. You just want to get up and run away. And, just staying there was so, in a way, I could say profoundly healing, maybe just that's a way of describing this welcoming. And then when you stay there, you can begin with this space, to notice, well, what's this like? And lo and behold, it may even just, as the tendrils of all the ways we stick to it and all the ways we interpret it and all the story and all the judgment, that whole sort of litany, whatever you want to put there, shame, resistance, that starts to fall away. It's just this space here around this sensation. And it may, begin to be like that warm wax Henry's been describing, or more particulate. Somehow it can dissolve, and it may come back again.
Mhm.
And so welcome it again. There's no end to this welcome. And there's actually nothing I know of, and as I say that, I understand that there are kinds of illnesses that I wouldn't say, oh, just sit. There are kinds of maladies that we have that maybe need to be addressed in other ways. But so much of our kind of baggage, the stuff that when I think of memories coming up, that can be released, really released. And you realize, oh, it can even become clear that it's just sort of first of all, what a relief. And then maybe a sense of, well, that's just a phantom. And then can come this sense of more and more of this present moment, where actually there's not a problem. But Henry, I feel you're so thoughtful and skilled at guiding us through this. You have, I'm sure, other ways more to say.
Well, I don't, that was, I've got nothing to add, Valerie. I thought that was just, I really don't have anything to add. Thank you so much. I hope that's helped the questioner. And I think there's so much in what you've said is marvelous. Let's go on to the next one. Yeah.
What is Kensho?
Well, could I take that, Valerie?
Yes, please.
Well, literally, like I said this morning, it means seeing original nature. I mean, there's a whole, what it is, man, we could take that on a lot of different levels. But I mean, one thing is simply you could say this: it's a sudden experience. It's a sudden shift, a sudden release. We either see that we're part of everything, or we see that there isn't anything, or we see that we are not anything. We see through our sense of self, through our sense of the world. We see that all is one somehow. We suddenly shift to a totally different register of experience that we've never seen before. I think even though we might have several Kenshos in a life of practice, it's possible to have more than one. Each one will be utterly unanticipated. We can have shades of experience that somehow could affirm an earlier one, but that's not really Kensho. Kensho is always something quite new. And you could say, well, what's that all about? I mean, man, we could spend the rest of today and tomorrow talking about what is actually happening. But I mean, at least simply put, we say the normal way of construing ourself and the world is gone. And whether that opens up a sense of oneness, whether it opens up a sense of nothing at all, whether it opens up a sense of no self at all, or all the above, is, who knows? It could do any of them, but it's really radical. It's like it's not like getting into a deep samadhi that you kind of still know in the back of your mind you're you. You don't in Kensho. It's just it's a new world. It's a new world order. It's like that implicate order or something of David Bohm. I don't know. It's like the pathless land of Krishnamurti. Suddenly that's reality. And so it's, yeah, I mean, that's what I've got to say for now, because otherwise we'd go on forever. But Valerie, did I leave anything out important?
Oh, well, I think you can go on forever,
And you
it's
still
just,
want to cover it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Ruben just saying once, it rearranges the furniture in the world. It's everything's different. Um, but yeah, you're just not there. Often called the great relief. And even though we hear language about this in this practice, it doesn't only happen in the context of Zen practice. I know people who I mean, you do these spontaneous experiences that really just break open, where that is just gone, that construct, that self. But outside of practice, it's very difficult to integrate.
Right.
Yeah, but there's just something that utterly collapses. And
Yeah. And out.
yes,
Sorry, go ahead.
I just was going to say, people, you said, I think, and maybe your first talk or yesterday, that it might seem harrowing, but it's not at all harrowing. It's just amazing, because no matter how deeply we practice and how near we may come, when this comes, it's a total surprise. I was reading somebody who said it fetches us. It's sort of a strange, I mean, it's poetic, because it fetches you away. I don't know, like where you were in place of that is this world. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say Chogyam Trungpa, he had that famous line. He said, it's like falling out of a plane. And the bad news is you haven't got a parachute. And the good news is there's no ground.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Zen is just full of attempts to express it and convey it. Maybe in a sense, every koan is an expression of it, an attempt to convey it. And I'd say also, without a practice context, there is the risk that when something like this happens, we think we've seen it all. In some sense, we kind of have seen it all, but in another sense, because in training, actually deeper experiences may happen. Turns out somehow there was even more, or there was even less, or however to put it. There was somehow still more to realize, more to let go of. And even though any one kensho is kind of total.
Yeah, and just on to that, I would say, we full-hearted, eager students, I mean, sincere, tend to read, and just even reading the 3 Pillars of Zen with this collection of awakening experiences, because the tradition was to document, to write it down. So, there were these records, and even there, some of them are so thorough, and others are more simple and perhaps not as thorough, but recognizable. There's something recognizable about it. But I can also really appreciate that, if it's an authentic experience, it can be it's still this shift, but it can, um, not be like, for example, Yamada Kon Roshi or Unmon, some of them that we think of, and still really launch a person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. 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 I've known, students where it was a sudden shift, but not somehow not huge, but absolutely it, Yeah. I think if someone is really ripe, it may even be somehow gentler,
Yeah.
but it's all there. It's the most, it's a marvelous, you feel totally fulfilled as a human being. That's one hallmark of it. There's not a square millimeter of you that isn't fulfilled
Yeah.
in it. And um, yeah, yeah.
There's an absolute sense that, uh, you know, I mean, for this I was born. It's fine to die,
Yeah.
and now I can begin.
That's beautifully put. Yeah. And we're always in awe of it. No, but I don't think anybody sort of gets to be kind of a master of it, absolutely not at all. It's like far sort of, it's very, very, very humbling. At least it kind of might, I suppose it might not be. If you're not in practice, you might start getting puffed up and think you're a master of the universe or something,
Yeah.
and set up your own teaching thing. And lots of people do that, actually. And maybe a lot of good may come out of it, for all I know.
Just also that, as much as we can marvel and wonder at this and fall down weeping in gratitude or dancing, laughing, it's intrinsic. We talked about this today.
Yeah.
It's intrinsic.
Yeah.
You're pre-programmed for this.
Yeah. We come out of it already. We're already an expression of it, actually. It's this level of reality, this implicate order, again using Bohm's
Yes.
words, but that's already here. And we're just so accustomed to identifying with this manifestation,
Yeah.
body and mind and heart, as the apparently separate thing, that we just don't know that order from which this is emerging. And in Kensho, suddenly the identification is stopped, and boom, we discover it. And and like I said, when to call it implicate order sounds like it's something, but it really probably in the end isn't something. And that too is a difficult thing to come to live, and takes more training, I'd say, for most of us, I guess.
Yeah, I remember being in a retreat long ago. I wasn't the teacher, and this young man. It was his first session, but he had really long been sitting on his own for a young person, and he had an opening. He was sitting with Mu, and I know this because I was working with him, even though at this retreat we were both there for this other teacher, and he it was fairly gentle but authentic, and his response was, "Duh," like, "Oh, it's this. It's it's all along this. It's just this world." And yet he was something. It really, I trust the teacher who acknowledged the experience, and this person was able to begin in the koans and feel kind of at home. But it was just sort of like, duh, he. And I've heard others just this quiet recognition, like, oh my gosh, it's been here all along.
Mm. Ah, lovely. Yeah. Well, the old idea is that even though we humans suffer, it's that we're the luckiest of the six realms. That we have human form, human body, mind, heart is the best. The reason it's the best is that the suffering and the awareness are, both of them are adequate for awakening. If you don't have any suffering, not so good, because you got no spur to try to awaken. And if you don't have enough awareness, also not so good. You can't really consciously awaken. So we're lucky to be human because we've got the ingredients, the magic ingredients of suffering and awareness in about the right balance. Isn't that right, Valerie? Have you heard something like
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, like, yes, I have. And also just, even, I mean, that is a very helpful formulation of it. Basically, just this trust that we have everything we need. You know, we're 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 made for this. It's our native ground. And coming to it is, I mean, with various ways. We've been saying just, somehow removing the obstacles to our um, being, really, really seeing that for ourselves, really experiencing it, falling into it, or, you know, letting the world fall in, whatever
Mm.
language.
Yeah. Yeah. Ah, great. Well, what do you think? We could stay on this forever, but should we move on?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Christian.
I'm new to Zen and am especially intrigued by the stories from Zen masters of yore. Is there a good history of Zen available that gives sense of the continuity of its evolution from India through China to Japan and Korea, with
Yeah.
particular attention to the masters like Dogen?
Valerie, can I just give a couple of citations?
Yes,
I'm,
please.
I mean, I think we may have mentioned it on this retreat that there's a good book called Zen: The Authentic Gate by Yamada Cohen that gives you background to this style of practice. The other thing that immediately springs to mind is Henri Dumoulin,
Yeah.
Dumoulin. He's got a history of Zen in India, China, and Japan in 2 volumes. It's probably a little bit, old-fashioned these days from a scholarly point of view, but it's a great read, and there's a lot that holds up in it, actually.
Yeah.
But
That the Demoulin um, is sort of the classic. And, if it were just for these sort of Chinese masters who come up so often in the koans, that whole rich koan world. Andy Ferguson's book
yeah,
is really a joy to read. What, the Chinese Zen masters? What's the title?
yeah, Zen's Chinese heritage, I think.
Yes, Zen's Chinese heritage. And one thing I really love about that, for one has to become adept at, um, you know, there's a very nice index in the back with the different names of the masters, because, coming from our Japan training with Sambo Zen, I tend to have a go-to for these Japanese names, Joshu instead of Xiaoshu. And Xiaoshu can be spelled in, 3 different ways at least. And so in that book, it's, what I love about it is you can become interested in one master, and go read, a little bit of the background and then the teaching. of that master, and then you can, jump to another one. I mean, it could be read cover to cover, but I I just feel that's a treasure trove every time I go to it. And again, the it uses the Chinese names, but you can fairly easily navigate to figure out the cluster of names around any one master in the tradition, and then go to that chapter. I've really enjoyed that.
So, Christian, when you're ready.
How do you choose expansion and trust in the universe versus falling into fear because of the current state of the world?
Valerie, do you want to pick that up?
Well, I don't see a verses. I have to hold those together. But I was just speaking from personal experience. I don't think a day has gone by, certainly this year, and probably for a long time, but really in this year, maybe the last 4 years, maybe 6, I don't know, where I haven't had a day at some moment of just, either fear or anxiety, horror. Suddenly the Pulse nightclub shooting, I remember that day. I mean, all of these mass shootings, and just the world situation, climate, hunger, fascism, this growing, looming authoritarian trend, um, you know, the ongoing oppression of marginalization of people's gender, sex trafficking. I mean, it's endless, right? And I feel very that it's important, and I feel like the day for the most part isn't complete if I don't have a sense of what's going on in the world. There's some kind of responsibility for that. It's funny, I'm sorry, this is a bit of an anecdote, but for a long time I worked at a graduate theological school, progressive, very interfaith, um, very diverse. But part of that experience was we worshiped together in chapel once a week, at least. And I felt like that was not an adequate experience if at the end of that I didn't know what was going on in the world. It had to come up somehow, so that if my work had taken me away and I didn't know this, that was going to inform me. So then I think we need to be fully engaged, aware, not blind, not turning away. But then how helpful is it to have these emotional reactions that are in a way kinds of defenses, I think. I mean, it's so natural to have a moment of fear or anxiety or horror or just utter heartbreak. And I then treat that like we've been talking about what we do on the cushion, because I don't want to be caught there. That's not helpful. So I stop and allow some space and really check, is this the most spacious response so that I can really, our model is Kenon, Kanzeon, hearer of the cries of the world, as my very own cries, not even as this one body. And then comes in compassion, um, not knowing, being with this intimacy. And there's a great trust. I mean, that's all about our practice. So they're not separate. But for me, at least, this is a living koan right now where, wanting to stay present, really not cut off part of my body and keep the heart open. These reactions tend to be kind of crusty. So mainly they're not helpful. Certainly to us, and they inhibit our capacities to really respond in loving ways, to find, well, what is it I can do today about this? Mm-hmm. And it might be, I mean, they're depending on your life. I mean, the day of the Pulse nightclub shooting, I wrote a piece for Facebook for the institution, together with some others, and kept vigil, planned, they're just any, or giving money or volunteering or, but those are just the natural responses once we get to a place of being able to fully be with and, trust this is my body.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. Yeah, I mean, I could speak to it as well, but I think I won't right now because that was a beautiful. That was a very clear, deep statement you just offered us. Okay, I'll just say one little thing.
Yeah, please do, because this is so your life, Henry.
all of us, But I mean, you could say sort of, again, kind of different levels. One is as we stop and are less distracted, we can start to see more clearly what is going on and our participation in systems of oppression.
Yes.
And be more aware of that and start to see ways that we can be working against them rather than with them. Just one little example. Another much kind of other level really is this Mahayana view where, the whole universe is an organism. The whole universe is one process. And it's on a large time scale and is on a large scale, simply. And, this is not some sort of cop out, but actually, when we're more aware of that boundless single expression, our perspective is very different in how we might act effectively. What effective action might look like. It's not like, well, it's all so big, don't bother, or something. Not at all. It's just that the perspective from which we consider the most effective ways to act is going to be different. And, the bodhisattva is the ideal, just as Valerie said, of Kuan Yin or Kanzeon. The ideal is sort of maximum devotion to compassionate healing of suffering, but out of the biggest vision somehow. So there's it's actually, they say, even while the bodhisattva sees very intensely sees and feels the suffering of the world, they see a world of beauty at the same time. And somehow that's where they're coming from. It doesn't lessen the wish to help and staunch the wounds, and maybe liberate wounds, but it does mean that the vantage is different. And you might have a taste of that. Yeah.
This is that koan, every day is a good day.
Right.
Right. The only way into that really is through this suffering of the whole world. To somehow, really see this quiet joy. And if it's an idea, it's doesn't hold up at all, but it's so real. There's one other aspect. I just have heard Jan Chosen Bay speak a couple of times lately. She's the co-abbot of Great Vow Monastery in Oregon. And her whole, she's now retired from her professional life, but long devoted life as a doctor, a medical doctor, to working with, overwhelmingly underprivileged children, or with families who have lost a child. So somebody who has been on a daily basis engaged in directly addressing human suffering and seeing in that one dimension of it, that one expression of it, very close company with it. And her talks in this pandemic, now we have 320 or more thousand in this country alone died, not to mention all of it. Her refrain is, pandemic is normal.
What a keen reminder. Thank you. Well, Christian, let's see. Maybe another. Are there more?
There's probably 7 or 8 more.
So how about, maybe we can certainly take one more and see how we do, but if you wouldn't mind saving them for tomorrow, is that okay? Thanks a lot. Okay.
Yeah, some of these are from yesterday. So the next one going down the list. How do we evaluate the benefits of our practice in our life? If one achieves a depth of practice on a retreat, for example, allowing one to roll with the vicissitudes of life, then as time passes, even with continuing practice, one gets angry with their kids or finds frustration in the small, and judgment and concern arises about the fruits of the practice. The question is, what kind of calibration to our practice is needed, and how to know how to do that evaluation that we're doing it well.
I'm very sympathetic to this. I think somewhere along the way, I think I may have mentioned this in my book, actually. I remember feeling like every time I'd go and see my teacher, it would be like a telephone pole. You know how the wires sag between the poles? You know, when you're driving along a road and there's a telephone line running by it, you know, every time there's a pole, the wires are going up and they hit the pole and then they start going down again and then they come up again to the next pole. And I felt my meetings with the teacher were just like that for my practice. It would be buoyed up and then I kind of stay up for a while and then gradually sort of slump a bit in practice. And I think there's some inevitability to that, actually. And maybe, I mean, I think if you're lucky and you keep at it, it just diminishes. You don't see that slump so much. And but there's also natural ebb and flow in practice anyway. But I think the question, maybe you could speak to it better than I could, Valerie, but it's about like, how do you actually measure? How do you calibrate how effective practice is being? And honestly, I think things like, you know, as a dad, you know, I very rarely actually lost my temper. I can count on one hand, I think, the times I did, but getting more fraught and less attentive with the kids and a little bit more like, let's just get through this meal, you know, rather than kind of really being open to their presence and where they were at. I think, I mean, I could definitely see when I was more committed to practice, and which, you know, there's a certain phase when I was very young when I just wasn't practicing as much. And then at a certain point, I really ramped it up. And I think it was so worth it that even though I was out of the home a little bit more, doing, you know, a handful, maybe 2, 3, 4 retreats a year of a few days each, it paid off, at least back then, you know, in terms of attentiveness and openness and in the home. And that's just as a parent. I don't know, Valerie, so that was one measure for me, you know.
I felt that the question almost answered itself. You know, I mean, we notice that this practice when we're deeply into it, and you know, retreats are these privileged times to really be able to set aside the everyday concerns. Um, and but you go back into the world and we notice how practice sort of does gradually, you know, it's the bodhisattva way. And over time, I think it does shape, it'll just show up in our lives, but not like a switch, boy. And so by calibrating, I think it's just, there's just a kind of natural disposition that comes from practice that makes us notice when something in our life, our daily life, maybe our relationships or just the way we're functioning in the world, living, maybe it may seem off, may not seem to really spring from that wellspring of practice. When you notice that, it's what a helpful teaching. And all just to notice it, sort of like sitting and noticing that you're trailed off in thinking. You know, there's a kind of calibration that comes right there, or with that, and maybe a chance to step back, soften. And then there will be times over you know, over some years of practice, perhaps, where you just suddenly notice that some pattern of behavior that seemed not to be creative or conducive or particularly liberative, helpful to self or others, it's shifting or has shifted. it's not so much like, well, now because of my practice, I'm going to do this. It just does. It can happen. One can even be sort of surprised by it, and then it redounds back to practice. So it's not only that our practice fuels life, but life can really loop back and help us in our practice. They feed each other.
Oh yeah, and yes, this sort of these habit patterns that we might have thought were pretty entrenched and hard to shift, yeah, they may just fall away by themselves. You don't, and we turned out we didn't have to do. Some point they just don't have a hold on us. That can happen. There was one other thing I wanted to say that just brought something up for me from what you were saying, Valerie. Let me see if I can quickly grab it. Oh no, I don't think I can. Oh yes, minimum effective dose. Finding out what do you need per day. I remember I realized at some point, for some phase of practice, I can't do less than an hour a day, and having done 40 minutes a day or something for years, it just had to go up, and then boom, it really made a difference. 90 minutes a day, whatever it is, you find your minimum effective dose. Okay, I think it's probably best that we pause here. And again, thank you very much, Christian, for conveying the questions and also for saving them for tomorrow. Thank you so much.
You're